What an incredibly kind introduction. Thank you very much, Eric, for having me. Thank you to PorcFest for having me. I have been in the freedom space for a long time. I went to Auburn University, which is across the street from the Mises Institute, which is an Austrian think tank, some of you may know. And I started wandering around those halls in 2013. So for more than a decade or so, I've been around the liberty spaces, and I've heard so much about the famed PorcFest. So it's fascinating to actually be here, get to experience it myself. It is as advertised. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Again, my name is JP Cortez. Today we're going to talk about Fiat's failures and how sound money will save the world. Oh, no. Oh, no, my... Nice. So the Sound Money Defense League is the organization which I run. I'm the executive director. Since 2014, we have worked to remonetize gold and silver. We were looking around at the state of play and we realized that no one woke up this morning and chose the US dollar. No one looked at the properties that the US dollar has and said, this is the money I would like to use. The truth is, we're trapped. There are no other functioning alternatives. Anything else that could plausibly be used as money is shackled with taxes and disincentives and regulations that make it impossible for these assets to function as money. So by going state to state and to the federal level, we can do what Eric just talked about here, which is to undermine this Federal Reserve System that enables all of the worst parts of our government. So from the jump, we'll talk about what sound money is. We're talking about a money that is subject to market forces and preserves its value over the long term. So, for example, if you're talking about a money whose value has maintained relatively well over long term, but the reason its value has been maintained is because of coercive legislation and coercive powers by the government, such as legal tender laws, then this does not count as sound money. We're talking about durable, reliable, honest, trusted money that has served as such for millennia compared to state money, fiat money, money by decree, money by executive order. It has two main value propositions. When we talk about sound money, we're talking about introducing two main benefits back into our monetary system. The first is the ability to plan. When money doesn't hold its value, you're unable to make long-term plans 10, 20, 30 years into the future. When you're planning 10, 20, 30 years into the future, that's how you develop infrastructure. That's how you develop schools and highways and defense systems. These are things that require the ability to plan long-term. Compare that to a money that you can't plan in long-term, a money whose value is being zapped away, in some cases by the hour. Imagine a money where you have to get paid twice per day, because if you wait until the end of your shift to use the money that you made yesterday, its value will be gone, and you won't be able to afford the basic necessities you need. This is a reality in other parts of the world. There's nothing that says this can't happen here, and frankly, we're well on the way for this to happen here in the United States. So the first benefit to sound money is the ability to plan, is the ability to make plans decades into the future. The second is that it acts as a bulwark against the government that would otherwise act recklessly unrestrained. A government that would go around fighting wars of choice in places that many Americans can't find on maps. A government whose bureaucracy continues to grow. A government whose entitlement systems measure up to nothing more than Ponzi systems. This is only possible through a money printing system where there are no checks on what the government can spend money on. And none of this would be possible if it required the consent of the taxed, the consent of the governed, to fund these projects. Mises, the famous economist of which the Mises Institute bears its name, spoke in 1912 about how sound money should be listed among your constitutional amendments, right up there with your right to the freedom of speech and the freedom to assemble and to the freedom to pray to any god which you wish. your freedom to own a gun, is the freedom for sound money, is the freedom to have honest, long-standing money. And frankly, as an American, that's your birthright. Money whose value is not sapping away. Since 1971, when we came off the gold standard, this has been an experiment. I'm sorry to tell you, dear friends and loved ones, you're part of an experiment. None of us consented to this. None of us voted for this. But we were thrown into this monetary system that actively steals from us while funding wars all around the world that happen in our name. It's important that gold and silver be enshrined in a country's founding documents, in a constitution, because we've seen over and over again that a state's capacity to limit itself does not exist. The societal toll that moving away from honest money and into money by decree takes far exceeds what the plain eye can see. You're talking about families who can no longer afford basic necessities. These are humans who worked decades of their lives responsibly to pay their taxes, to pay their bills, and to put money aside for the future. And then one day a government can decide to print any amount of the money supply straight into existence, completely withering away the hard work and the value that those savings had. Money is a transmission, it's information, it transmits value across time and space. What good is a money that does not do that? Historically, we've seen that the fiat experiments that go on all over the world always end in catastrophe. And every single time that a money dies, this is not a simple changeover. When a money dies, it is violent. It oscillates. People resort to crime, to drugs, to desperation. People who can no longer afford basic necessities, the ability to rent a car or an apartment, the ability to pay an energy bill, buying groceries. These things are all coming into question when the government, without consent of the governed, prints way past its assets. Going through very quickly, we're going to talk about a couple of fiat experiments. The first one happened here in the United States, actually not far from where we're sitting right now. In 1690, Massachusetts introduced paper money to the United States before the United States even existed. Like many other military conquests, the payment depends on a successful military conquest. But when you go to pillage another country or another area, and your conquest fails, and you have to come back, and these soldiers who risk their lives are being paid in fake money, they don't appreciate that for long. And that's exactly what happened in the 1690s in Massachusetts. The government even promised. They knew the dangers of printing paper money. In fact, the founders did too, the people who wrote our Constitution. In the Federalist Papers, you have James Madison writing under a pen name talking about how fiat money makes a lottery out of all goods, how it's theft. It is to steal from efficient, productive people. Despite the government's promises, they exceeded past what they said they would print anyway. And you had an economy, an environment, where tailors were not willing to accept paper money for their cloth repairs. Cobblers were not willing to fix shoes for this paper money. Why would they, after all? The value of our time and our labor is to be stored, it's to be transmitted in this money. And this paper money is not a representation of the hard work that many of us put in every day. The next example is one that I'm sure many people in this room have heard before, the Weimar Republic. After World War I, the Weimar Republic, Germany, was in a position where it was in deep debt, having to pay deep reparations to many countries. Its economy was in shambles. There was desperation along the streets. People could not afford basic necessities. People could not find a job. People had no meaning. There was very little to look forward to. There was despair atop an entire country. And you think about how that led to moments in history that we know of. To be sure, The environment in which Hitler was able to rise to power was one of desperation, of economic desperation, created by central banks and governments who printed money way exceeded past their limits. This doesn't happen by accident. And to be sure, inflation is not an accident either, nor an act of God. This is a policy choice. All of this is done by politicians, and in many cases, unelected central bankers and bureaucrats. We have very little say in a system like this, and this type of system is what enables the worst of us to rise to power. More recently, you have the economic collapse of Venezuela. There was the viral clip of the president, some of you may remember this, doing a news hit at the time, the Venezuelan president, talking about how that the Venezuelan people should rest assured that his policies were going to bring about stability, to worry not, because those in charge had it under control. But then the camera panned out a little bit, and you could see the Venezuelan president step off camera to take a bite of an empanada. I love an empanada. There's no knock on empanadas. The people of Venezuela can't afford empanadas. The rich people can. The people closest to the political machine, the people closest to the central bank itself. Those people are doing well. But average people, hourly workers, people who wake up every morning slaving away, they go to work to a job they probably don't like, those people can't afford empanadas. And this in itself is a microcosm of how these central bank systems, fiat itself, serves to benefit those already closest to the structural machine. Worse yet, you can see how inflation and its devastating effects do not remain within a single country's borders. Today, we're living through a humanitarian crisis where refugees out of Venezuela have nowhere to go. Colombia, Ecuador, Mexico, the United States is having to take in millions of people. This does not come free of cost. Many places can't support this many people in flux at one time. The infrastructure does not exist to support this. Because of government systems, because of central banking, because of proliferation of money, you have humanitarian crises. These are not X's on a graph. These are not supply and demand charts. This is not an esoteric thing. Economics touches us in real ways. That brings us to here, America, today. In 1971, Nixon famously closed the gold window, severing any last tie that the United States dollar had to gold. Since then, the supporters of Austrian economics, free market thinkers, libertarians, and people of all of those particular stripes, this experiment went exactly the way they said it would. Massive deficits exploding, a country $37 trillion in debt, financial anxiety at an all-time high, food insecurity becoming more ever-present. The stagflation of 1970s was a result of moving away from a standard, an honest weight and measure. We exchanged a gold standard for a PhD standard, and this is what we've ended up with. 2008 brought another one of these collapses that was brought on in large part because of easy money through the 2000s, when the government, the Federal Reserve, kept interest rates artificially low, creating a bubble. This is not an original or novel story. This is what happens when the Federal Reserve and the federal government try to play God. People lose their homes. People can't afford groceries. People have to move. That's the thing. Think about money. What money actually is. People spend their entire lives working in search, in pursuit of money. People wake up in the morning and they go to school and they earn an education and they go deep into debt. And then they leave their loved ones and their families behind, moving away to another part of the country where they know no one, in search for money. Why? Why does it have to be this way? It does not. There's nothing in the rules that says it has to be this way. In fact, The Constitution itself specifically says that it doesn't and that it shouldn't. COVID-19, or actually I should better say, the government's response to COVID-19 brought the newest infusion of inflation to the United States. Printing 40% of the money supply and injecting it into the American economy at once led to drastic but completely predictable results. The real estate market completely skyrocketed. For many, many years here in the United States, Americans have used home ownership as a means to store and even grow their wealth. And that has been effective for a long time. But today, even the prospect of a home ownership has been closed, shut in the face of millions who have no real chance of ever owning a home like this anymore. So what's left? What other options do people have? The thing about a fiat system is that it introduces a trilemma to anyone holding the currency. You can spend it immediately to try to get the most out of your purchasing power before inflation withers away the purchasing power of your money. You can save it and pay the inflation tax. The government is hammering you for choosing not to spend your money. Or you can invest it into risky stock markets that many people don't understand the nuances of or don't really understand at all. None of these options are good, and it's the only three options that we are faced with in a monetary system like the one we live under today. Of course, importantly, it's impossible to talk about sound money, especially in the context of the United States, without talking about war. War is the single most destructive act that human beings participate in. And for decades now, the United States has been fighting wars of choice, either actively fighting the wars or funding the wars, in some cases funding both sides of conflicts that we're not involved in. And for what? Americans at home are not any safer. We're poorer than we've ever been. And frankly, we're on the brink of World War III right now. To be sure, I don't mean to say that the problems in the Middle East are a result of the United States coming off the gold standard in 1971. But for a long time, America has been fighting these wars and funding these wars and making Americans less safe. What we found, the solution that we found, is that while we know this monetary dysfunction that enables all of these horrible things starts and stems from the federal government and from the Federal Reserve, we know that that's where the problem lies. And there are a lot of people doing good work talking about ending the Fed and taking the battle to that level. But we've found that one of the most effective things we can do is to remonetize gold and silver at the state level and to create a pressure valve, an alternative for people to use gold and silver as money if they wanted to. This federal assault doesn't mean that states have to stand by while their taxpayers and their own balance sheets wither away because of monetary policy. States can mitigate some of this damage, and I'm happy to say that since 2014, they have been. In 2014, when we first started this project, you had a state, maybe 1, 2, 3 states that would introduce a bill on this topic. Very few of them would pass. There wasn't a lot of excitement for these projects. And after more than a decade now of working on this sound money legislation, it brings us to today, in 2025, where 35 states currently, this year, have introduced and considered sound money legislation, pro-gold and silver legislation. More than a dozen have enacted this legislation into law, a far cry from what it was just 10 years ago. And to be sure, a lot of this, none of this is an accident. None of this is the result of an accident or even federal gatekeeping politicians deciding to top-down implement sound money. This is an individual grassroots movement that has burgeoned nationwide to what it is today. Like I said, the most impactful thing, by my estimation, that we can be doing, that the Sound Money Defense League can and is doing to restore gold and silver, to restore sound money, is to remove the impediments that surround it. Let me introduce a scenario to you. Many of you know what U.S. silver eagles are. It's the U.S. minted coin. Today, they're probably worth around $40 each. The spot price of silver, I think, is close to 37, so maybe a bit over $40. So let's say you buy 3 silver eagles, and you buy them at different times, and you go to your grocery store with a cart full of groceries, $100 worth, and you go to pay with these silver eagles. Today, the transaction that would take place would you would tender the eagles, and then you would say, oh wait, what was my cost basis for all 3 eagles? Because I bought them at separate prices at separate times. Okay, now that I have that, what is the cost of these groceries? Now, what's the difference between the groceries and each individual eagle? Okay, now that difference, there's a tax on that gain. So what is 28% of this number? You can see how quickly this becomes unworkable. There's too much friction. It simply cannot function as money today. And so to remove these impediments, to remove the briar and the brush and the thistle that stands in the way of people actually being able to transact in anything other than the US dollar, is a lifeline. We're on the Titanic, and all of the available lifeboats have been shackled and locked away. We need to unlock these lifeboats. And so we go around state to state removing these taxes, but there's more to do than just that. We can also affirmatively reaffirm that gold and silver have a place in the US Constitution. As everyone in this room, I'm sure, knows, the United States Constitution in Article 1, Section 10 says, no state shall make anything but gold and silver a tender in the payment of debts. Why is that? Why did it say that? Why did the founders know to put that in? Because they had experience with paper money. Because they had seen paper money happen here within the North American landmass and overseas. How is it that over thousands of years, civilizations with no connection to one another all ended up on using gold or silver or some combination of the two as money? It's not paper. More than just taxes, states can, again, reaffirm gold and silver status as the only form of money mentioned in the Constitution. They can establish in-state bullion depositories with which to store their own gold. They can even develop gold reserves themselves. I'm happy to say that in Wyoming, just earlier this year, I was out there, we worked on legislation to pass eventually Senate File 96, which was enacted into law that established a $10 million gold reserve for the state of Wyoming. This is not nothing. Let me explain this to you. States, the United States themselves, are looking at de-dollarizing. States themselves are looking at lowering the exposure that they have to US dollar-denominated assets. This is happening at the same time as Zimbabwe talking about developing its own gold-backed currency. This is happening at the same time that places like BRICS countries, Russia, India, China, are actively stockpiling gold at breakneck paces not seen in decades. This is happening at the same time where supposed allies like Germany and others are out loud talking about repatriating the gold that they store here in the United States because they no longer trust it to be safe here. More eyes are attuned to the US dollar's status as a global reserve currency than there has been in recent history. And to be sure, this is the fault of the United States government. This is a government that weaponized and politicized and perverted its currency to harm its enemies and to help its friends. And so understandably, countries, adversaries and enemies alike, and even internally here within the United States, are looking for alternatives. They're looking for non-inflatable, politically neutral money, which the US dollar is not. He who prints the US dollar has so much power through sanctions, through the ability to block people out of the SWIFT global final currency system. There's a lot of power in being the global reserve currency, and the United States has weaponized that power. They have used it. By restoring gold and silver at the state level, the hope is that you can create a critical mass because good policy percolates upwards. And when states adopt good policies, you find that the federal government is forced to act or address certain issues. So these are all the things that states are doing. And these are all the states this year that considered these projects. This is 35 states. This is 70% of the country, not to mention Washington, D.C. The vast majority of states here in the United States are actively looking at ways to re-implement gold and silver into their monetary system because they know what fiat currency brings, ultimately, inevitably. The bold ones are the ones that were enacted into law. I told a story the other day that I'll tell again because it's topical and it's more dramatic than some of the novellas that I grew up having my parents watch. In Maine, former Senator Eric Brakey, who just introduced me, and who is helping to put together this fest. Before he did this, he was a state senator in Maine, and like he mentioned, he and I worked on several pieces of legislation together. In 2024, maybe 2023, we worked on a bill to remove the sales tax on gold and silver. As of today, 46 states have ended this tax on gold and silver. This is the easiest issue to explain. This is the easiest issue to have politicians understand. How can you tax the only form of money mentioned in the Constitution? When you walk into a grocery store and you exchange 4 quarters for 1 paper dollar, you're not taxed on this exchange. And that's exactly what you're doing when you're exchanging paper Federal Reserve notes for U.S. constitutional gold. Additionally, when you buy an asset in states, you're not charged a sales tax. If you go to your E-Trade account, your Schwab account today, and you buy a Tesla stock or Amazon stock or anything like this, you're not going to pay a sales tax on that because the government will come and tax you on the back end. They'll charge you a capital gains tax. But in the case of gold and silver, in a couple of jurisdictions around the country, you're charged a sales tax when you buy the metal, the state will charge you a capital gains tax when you sell the metal, and then the federal government will charge you a capital gains tax as well. It's subject to triple taxation in some places. It's so easy to see how this is unfunctional as money, and to be sure, that's not an accident. Gold and silver have functioned as money for a long time. It's not an accident that those are the ones that have been saddled and kept away from the general populace. And of course, you have Gresham's law. So long as the government is willing to accept depreciating paper notes for payment of taxes, why would I ever spend my gold? So, unsurprisingly, just like the economists told us, the good money has gone into hiding. Because why would we use it if we know that the government accepts this gross paper stuff? At the same time, like I mentioned, it's not just Wyoming. Wyoming did pass legislation this year enabling a $10 million gold reserve. Last year it was Utah who passed legislation enabling a gold reserve that we worked on. And in that bill, I believe, as of last I heard, they're approaching just over $100 million that the state of Utah currently has of physical gold stored in their state on their balance sheet. The treasurer and the board of finance people over there were looking at the state's balance sheet and saying, wait a second, we have assets on this balance sheet that have great dollar denomination exposure, and we find that, yes, they're returning 3-4% as assets. 4% return, okay. But when inflation is 7 or 8 or 9%, what you're telling me is that you're taking a 4% loss. You're losing money on this transaction. And states themselves are waking up to this and saying, wait, our balance sheets can't exist like this. We need something without counterparty risk. Counterparty risk is an important part of this that is under-considered. The United States dollar today has massive counterparty risk. What that means is that if the United States defaults today, the paper in your wallet and the numbers in your bank account mean nothing, because those numbers and those paper notes are all liabilities of another party. Gold and silver have no counterparty risk. They are the final extinguisher of debt. They are not anyone else's liability. That's what makes them good money. We put out an index, I put out an index every year that ranks all 50 states on a number of criteria. I believe as of this year it was 14 different criteria involving the state's tax policies, whether or not it's reaffirmed gold and silver as legal tender, whether or not it's established a gold depository, whether or not it has issued a gold bond, has developed state gold reserves, so on and so forth, to establish a really holistic view a holistic scorecard of the best states and the worst states in the country on this issue. I had a couple of copies. I apologize. I gave them away yesterday. You can find this online, or you can email me after this. I'm happy to send this to anyone who is interested. But it is a very robust picture of what sound money looks like here in the United States, and I encourage anyone to check it out. And if you're in one of these states, if you look at these scorecards and say, wow, my state's down at the bottom, reach out. So many legislative projects have gotten started because people, concerned citizens in the state, said, wait, my state is bad on this issue. How can we help? And just that is enough to get a project started. So if you're in one of these states and you want to take action, please do. This is the index itself, the main scorecard. The darker states are the ones who are worse on this issue. The lighter states are the ones who are better on this issue. Unsurprisingly, places like New Hampshire, places like Wyoming, places like Utah, Alaska, near the top of the index just about every year. Unsurprisingly, places at the bottom, Vermont, Maine, who not only, oh my goodness, I never told the story about Brakey. Okay, I'm sorry, we're gonna go back. So Eric Brakey and I, in 2023 or 2024, tried to pass this legislation to end the gold and silver sales tax on precious metals. It's the easiest one to understand, so we went for it. The bill, I testified before several committee hearings. We had several good questions. There was pushback, but we thought we were going to be able to get this done. The bill reported favorably out of the committee. The bill reported favorably out of the Senate. We made it over to the House of Representatives in Maine, and we were excited about the prospect of getting this done. But then the House, the main House, broke from their normal protocol, and they had not two, but 3 different votes on our same bill. After the first bill, we had the votes. We won. And then they said, no, we're going to hold this over. We're going to hold another vote tomorrow. Okay? We held the second vote, and again, we won by a hair's breadth, but we had enough votes to make this happen. And then a legislator in Maine called for a procedural hold over the weekend. And they spent the weekend whipping votes and telling Democrats that if they don't fall in line, they are persona non grata in their own party. Senator Brakey himself was told by Speaker of the House, this bill has nothing to do with the contents of the bill. This is about power. This is a political party wanting to ensure that the minority party does not even for a second believe that they have power. And it's not that uncommon. That bill, the next Monday, we went back in and we lost by a vote of 71 to 72. It was heartbreaking, and it was maybe the closest I've seen the political machine up close. And it shows you, one, that this machine is easily captured. There are political forces at play that have nothing to do with the legislation being considered many times. And frankly, the truth is, as you look around the United States, there are nearly 8,000 elected legislators in all 50 states in the United States. In 2014, when we started, the vast majority have never heard the term sound money, had never considered questions about money, where it comes from, why we use it, where it derives its value. And I'm happy to say that the tide has turned on that. More legislators than ever have woken up to this reality, because they're not only protecting people in their state, but now they have an incentive to protect their own balance sheets. All of this in the United States is happening while there's a global revolution happening, a global realignment of gold back into the global monetary system. Countries, from allies to adversaries, are rediscovering the value of money that isn't politicized. Like I mentioned at the beginning, and I think Eric mentioned at the beginning too, our efforts are primarily aimed at the state level because that's where you can make the most difference. There's gridlock at the federal level. It's not a place you go if you actually want to make a difference and pass policy. But at the state level, that's not the case. Though, that said, we still have made brief forays into the federal level. In 2019 and in 2024, we worked with Congressman Alex Mooney from West Virginia to introduce the Monetary Metals Tax Neutrality Act. This would remove the capital gains tax on gold and silver at the federal level. This is important because most states only charge this capital gains tax because most states start with their federal AGI when they do taxes. So by removing the tax at the federal level, in one foul swoop, most states would by default eliminate it as well. More recently, something many in this crowd may have heard of, is that last week, Congressman Thomas Massie reintroduced the legislation called the Gold Reserve Transparency Act to audit America's gold in Fort Knox and all the places where America's gold is purportedly stored. This bill is a bill we worked on in 2019 and in 2021 with Mooney, but times are different, aren't they? The world seems to be coalescing around gold in a way they've never had before, and it's forcing the American government to answer questions surrounding the shadowy obscurity that has cloaked America's gold holdings for a long time. To be sure, it's very easy to laugh at people who talk about Fort Knox and an audit as conspiracy theorists. But it's important to understand that these conspiracy theories only exist because any government attempt to actually audit America's gold or be forthcoming with gold that belongs to y'all, not the American government, has been frivolous. They do not take this seriously. Most recently in the 70s, when they brought in a couple of Congress people, they pulled out a pre-approved container and pulled out a pre-approved bar out of that container. They handed it to the Congress people. They brought in cameras. They let the Congress people take the bars, hold them in their hands, fondle in them. Wow, this feels really great in our hands. Look at how great gold and silver is. The bars went back in the box went back on the shelf, and everyone went home. There was not a single assaying. There was not a single serial number matching. There was no weighing or testing of any sort. And now you have people like Elon Musk, who is, I believe today, still persona non grata in the administration, but tomorrow, who knows, he might be back inside, talking about doing a live stream of America's gold holdings. We cannot be fooled by this again. This does not suffice for a comprehensive audit. We do not need more cameras or dog and pony shows or made-for-TV Hollywood movies. We need a true audit to see that the greatest global reserve asset that has ever existed for thousands of years is in fact still in the United States' possession. So the questions about the gold itself, is it physically there? That's what this bill would determine. And a full assaying, making sure that the bars are in fact pure. They are not. Open secret, those bars are not pure. They are not globally liquid right now. The giant gold reserve that the United States has of 261 million ounces is not market liquid today. It would have to be refined. And then third, and this has never happened before, we're calling for a full accounting of the gold that's stored in America's vaults. So the question of whether or not it's there is one, but if it is there, who owns it? An ounce of gold can change hands 1,000 times and never move an inch. Who owns it? Has it been swapped? Has it been leased? Has it been encumbered? Has it been financially transacted in at all? Other countries, the Bank of International Settlements, the International Monetary Fund. Who owns the gold that belongs to us? These are all legitimate questions. We seek to have some of these questions answered. Lastly, I think, and I'll take a couple of questions if there are any. Lastly, I want to encourage everyone here within the sound of my voice or anyone listening back to this to understand that you have a voice at the state level. The truth is you probably don't in Washington, D.C. You can email or call your congressperson. You can try to tweet at them or send them a message. You might get a form response back. An aide might get your message. They might pass it on to the congressman. You might get a thoughtless email. But that's not the case at the state level. In Lincoln, Nebraska, in Frankfort, Kentucky, in Salem, Oregon, in those places, in Nashville, Tennessee, Atlanta, Georgia, in those places, you have a power, you have a voice within your state legislature, because I can promise you, having done this for more than a decade, these people are not used to organized movements. It takes but 10, 15 phone calls and emails to light a fire under the asses of people who would likely not act if not for you taking action. So everyone, please believe that you have a voice because you very much do, and I encourage all of you to wield it. Thank you very much. if there aren't any questions, I'll just be hanging back out.
Hi, JP. Thanks for coming. My question is, do you think Trump's golden age might be favorable to removing that capital gains tax on gold and silver, or maybe asking our representatives in Congress and our senators to reintroduce Alex Mooney's Precious Metals Tax Neutrality Act? I'm working on my Congressman Byron Donalds on that various thing. And we've had success in Florida. As you know, we just passed the gold and silver legal tender bill. So I urge everybody to call your senators, call your representatives in Washington and at the state level, because it's in the air now. There is a heightened awareness about the high deficit, the danger that the de-dollarization going on globally. States are open to this type of legislation. We have 10 states now, I believe, right?
I believe that's right.
And we're going to work on a couple more, and we'd really like to see it happen here in New Hampshire. So I know there's one fella in the House of Representatives. His name is John Hunt in the New Hampshire House of Representatives. And John Hunt is a wealthy politician. I hear he is heir to the Alcoa fortune, and he prides himself on trying to knock down every gold and silver bill that comes across. He also sits on the Commerce Committee, I believe. So a deluge of phone calls to him specifically would be helpful, and his cohorts. But the states need to reaffirm gold and silver as legal tender. And I applaud your efforts, because you've gotten it across the finish line in several states.
Thank you.
Kudos to you.
Thank you. Quickly, though, he actually did bring up a point that I would be interested in talking about, in that we have to hold politicians accountable. I know that everyone here knows that. I know that many people live with that as their mantra. We have to actually hold politicians accountable. And I don't mean necessarily in the we need to go vote every 4 years. I mean in a more granular way than that. For example, this gold audit that we're talking about here, we're going to get a little inside baseball for a second. On the United States balance sheet, these 261 million ounces that they own are listed at $42 per ounce. That, in dollar terms, is what the government says they own. They're talking already about taking that 42 ounce, that arbitrary peg at $42, and moving it. Moving it where? I don't know, 10,000, 20,000, a million? If you move it, you can use that money to pay down the national debt. If you move it, you can use that windfall to buy other assets. Politicians, both in the cabinet and elected politicians, are already talking about how to monetize the gold that America has by revaluing it. Even politicians that are supposedly allies or good on liberty. So be aware that even the good politicians, there's something very intoxicating about this printing press that makes it impossible for politicians to see straight, even the good ones. Hold them accountable.
Thanks, JP. I had a question about the sales tax. So it's my understanding that even in states where you can purchase a certain amount of gold without sales tax, if you purchase under a certain amount, it's still subject to sales tax. So that means that like the smaller transactions would still have this friction, even though if you purchase investable amounts of gold, let's say, that there's no sales tax. Is my understanding correct, first of all? And then second, what, if anything, are you doing to address that?
Your understanding is correct. This is what we call threshold states. So you're right. In some cases, most of the times we'll just go in and we'll end all the sales taxes. In some cases, there are laws that have been passed that establish thresholds that you have to meet in order to qualify for the exemption. So in the case of, we'll say, Connecticut, there is a $1,000 threshold. So if you buy below that amount, the state's going to come in and hammer you with a 6.5%, I believe, sales tax in Connecticut. If you buy above that amount, they say, no, you're fine. Sales tax free. This is regressive. This is a poor person tax. People who are wanting to go in and dollar cost average or buy a couple Silver Eagles for their grandkids at the coin shop every week, this harms them actively and does not harm the big players, the big wealthy investors. This is backwards policy. And we go state to state eliminating those. The reason I used Connecticut is because right now there's a bill on the Connecticut governor's desk to eliminate their $1,000 threshold. He was actually expected to sign that today. I was hoping to be able to say that today. He has not signed it as of an hour ago. But yes, this is something we're working to remove across the country. Connecticut still has one, New York has one, Massachusetts has one, until recently Florida had one. So this is very uncommon. It's not something states do often. But yes, it is something that states do. And we're working on ending that.
Can I ask another question?
Yeah, of course.
So this is a separate subject. It's also my understanding that most of the dollar trade that happens in the world is not retail trade, but financial market trade. So something like $1 quadrillion or some unfathomable number of dollars are engaged in trading options and stocks and this sort of a thing every year. Are there any legal barriers to forming a financial market where the unit of currency is gold or silver instead of the dollar? And is that something your organization would address?
There are many impediments to establishing an alternative system to the dollar. People have gone to jail for doing so, for trying to do so. Yes, of course, like I mentioned, all of the rules are stacked so that the dollar can be the only player. They don't want you using anything else. There are legal tender laws that make it to where you cannot legally pay your taxes in anything other than the US dollar. There are, yes, many rules and regulations that make it to where you have no other choice. As a question of whether or not we're doing anything about this in particular, yes, but I think in a different way than maybe what you'd expect. The idea of remonetizing gold and silver comes from the idea of easing the access and the use into and out of, removing the friction. Doing what you're talking about, or maybe what I'm imagining you're talking about, would require, for example, like a top-down approach, a gold standard. We can implement something like this. And while a gold standard implemented by the federal government, kind of at a top-down level, say, for example, an arbitrary peg at where an ounce of gold or X amount is worth $1, instead of doing something like this, what I believe would be more useful would be simply for the government to get the hell out of the way. We don't need laws establishing new systems. We don't need new constructs or rails or alternatives, or rather, government or alternatives that carry the imprimatur of the state. I don't need that. I need gold and silver to be able to function as money the way they have for thousands of years. And by simply getting them out of the way, we might find that those naturally occur. Because I think if given the choice, and this is important, and it speaks to how Americans, full of choice in every single way, we have 1 million shirts to match every need, 1 million cars to match any terrain, but there's only one money. We only have one choice for money. And it absolutely shouldn't be that way. And so we're working to fix that. Thank you.